I remember the low, steady buzz of the ceiling light in that dressing room more clearly than anything else. It hummed above me, faint and constant, while the rest of the resort pulsed with happiness that never fully touched me. My name is Jenna Rodas. I was 31 years old on the morning I married the man I loved. I stood surrounded by silk, flowers, and mirrors, yet my thoughts kept circling the heavy feeling in my chest. The kind of weight that appears when the past refuses to remain buried. The makeup artist had just stepped out, and the room felt strangely frozen in time. Outside, laughter drifted in from the courtyard, glasses clinked softly, and a breeze slipped through the open windows carrying the scent of pine from the lake nearby. It should have felt soothing. Instead, it felt like a quiet warning urging me to stay alert. Before I continue, let me ask you something. What were you doing when you started listening to this story? For me, everything was unfolding in that moment. I was barefoot in the dressing room, gripping my bouquet as if it were the only solid thing anchoring me. If you want, tell me where you were when the story began. I like knowing where people enter moments like this, because they feel different depending on where you stand. A knock hit the door. Not soft. Sharp and impatient. A rhythm I had known my entire life. My mom walked in without waiting. She looked flawless as always, blonde hair pinned just right, pearl earrings matching the cool shade of her dress. She smiled the smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. She brushed invisible lint from my shoulder and said I looked beautiful. I nodded, trying to let her touch feel normal. It never did. I had spent my entire adult life chasing approval that never truly arrived. She adjusted my veil and stepped back, her eyes scanning me like she was checking a list rather than looking at her daughter. Then she said Dad was outside with a last-minute change to the ceremony plan. Her voice sounded light, but I caught the tension in her jaw. Something was off. When she left, I exhaled slowly. My nerves settled for a second, then tightened again. A few minutes later, I peeked toward the balcony where my family stood. That was when I saw it. Dad leaned close to whisper into my sister Sarah's ear. Sarah, 3 years older than me, always quiet, always obedient. She stood still while he spoke, his face firm and focused. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Sarah nodded. Not a small nod. A complete surrender. She turned quickly and headed toward the hallway, eyes down as she passed the guests. My stomach nodded. I knew exactly what he had sent her to do. Dad wanted what he believed belonged to him. The thing I had taken 6 months earlier. The small, dark USB hidden in his unlocked safe. The one I had told no one about. Not even the man I was about to marry. I stepped back before anyone could notice me. My hands shook as I pressed them into the folds of my dress. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that no one knew where it was. No one except me. I had moved it the night before, hiding it somewhere no one would think to look. Somewhere safe. Still, fear has a way of shrinking logic. Bridesmaids rushed in and out with final details, but the room felt like it was closing in. I couldn't stop replaying Dad's whisper, the urgency in his stance, the dread in Sarah's eyes. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 12. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I barely heard the disturbance outside. A gasp. A muttered voice. Then the door opened slowly. Sarah stepped inside, her face pale as my veil. Her shoulders were rigid, her breathing shallow. She avoided my eyes, staring past me like the room offered escape. Dad appeared behind her, moving faster than I expected. His voice was low and sharp as he asked if she had done exactly what he told her to do. Sarah swallowed. Her eyes flicked to mine for a split second, fear clear in them. Then she shook her head. It's gone, she whispered. I froze. Dad stared at her, disbelief written across his face as something inside him broke. Color drained from his skin. My mom rushed over asking what was happening, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, frozen, like time had stopped for him alone. Sarah backed against the wall and went silent. That's when I understood. They believed it was still with me. They still thought I was the Jenna who could be pressured into silence. But that girl was gone. Outside, guests whispered. Music began softly. The coordinator poked her head in and said it was time to line up. Everything kept moving while my family unraveled behind me. I adjusted my veil with a calm I didn't feel. I was about to walk down the aisle carrying 6 months of secrets in my chest. And I knew before the day ended, every truth I had carried would surface. What none of them knew was that I had already chosen my moment. And it was coming next. I stepped out of the dressing room with my veil resting neatly on my shoulders, each movement feeling deliberate, heavy with meaning. Every step forward felt like it was pulling me closer to a truth I had avoided for too long. People smiled as I passed. Someone brushed my arm and told me I looked stunning. Another laughed softly and said it was the perfect day for a fresh start. I nodded at them all, but inside my chest, something tightened with every breath. At the top of the staircase leading into the courtyard, the music floated upward, warm and slow. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and lake water. For a brief second, I wondered how different everything might feel if I had never opened that safe 6 months earlier. If I had never taken that small black USB that flipped my entire world inside out. The memory rushed back so fast it felt like I had stepped backward in time. It was late afternoon in early spring. I had gone to my parents' house to pick up a box of old cookbooks my mom wanted to donate. She insisted they were stored in the basement closet, even though I didn't remember ever seeing cookbooks down there. I walked down the narrow wooden stairs, the kind that creaked even when you stood still. The basement smelled of damp concrete, cardboard, and something metallic. The storage closet door was half open. I reached for the light switch, but the bulb barely flickered to life. Old holiday decorations were stacked along one wall. On the other side sat a safe I had never noticed before, hidden behind paint cans and a folded ladder. The safe door wasn't fully closed. It hung slightly ajar, like someone had been interrupted. I crouched and rested my hand on the door. It opened with almost no resistance. Inside were 2 manila envelopes, a passport I didn't recognize, and the small black USB sitting on top, as if it had been dropped there at the last second. Without thinking, I reached in. My fingers brushed the USB just as I heard my dad's voice calling from upstairs. The sound jolted me. I dropped the envelopes back into the safe. His footsteps moved toward the basement door. For a split second, I considered leaving everything exactly as it was. Then something cold and instinctive took over. I closed my hand around the USB and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I shut the safe and nudged the paint cans back into place. When Dad opened the basement door and looked down at me, his face held a strange tightness. He asked if I'd found the cookbooks. I said yes, even though I hadn't touched a single one. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to read something behind my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch with the USB resting on my coffee table. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I stared at the small black rectangle for a long time before finally plugging it into my laptop. I expected spreadsheets or legal documents I wouldn't understand. Instead, I found something far worse. My name appeared again and again. On property records, tax filings, trust documents I had never heard of. Half the files contained blurry scans of signatures that were supposed to be mine, but weren't. I knew my handwriting. These weren't my signatures. My hands went numb as I scrolled. Some accounts showed balances so large my mind couldn't process them. I shut the laptop and pressed my palms into my eyes until the room blurred. None of it made sense. Why was my name on any of it? I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell Sarah. I barely understood it myself. Some part of me believed that if I said it out loud, everything would collapse. The next morning, I told myself I would forget about it. I went to work and pretended it had all been a bad dream. But around 9 o'clock, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. No greeting. No explanation. Just one sentence that made my breath catch. Do not give it back. It will protect you. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Whoever sent it knew I had the USB. They knew what was on it. And they knew my dad wanted it back. I closed my laptop slowly, terrified that even my thoughts might be overheard. I pressed my hands against the cold surface of my desk. For the first time in my life, I felt completely exposed. Footsteps behind me pulled me back to the present. The wedding coordinator gently touched my elbow and told me it was time. The guests were seated. Ethan was waiting. I forced air into my lungs and pushed the memories down. There would be time later to unravel everything. Right now, I had to walk into a day that was supposed to be beautiful. But I already knew the truth. Beauty had nothing to do with what was coming. I stepped toward the stairs, gripping the railing so tightly my fingers ached, and let the music guide me forward. The melody carried me on, but my mind did what it always did under pressure. It drifted backward. As I began descending one careful step at a time, steadying myself with the rail, old memories surfaced like shadows at the edge of my vision. I had spent my entire life moving toward what my parents wanted and away from what my instincts tried to warn me about. That day was no different. At least, not yet. I remembered the first time my name was tied to something that was never mine. I was 22, living in a cramped apartment in Tacoma with mismatched furniture and a faucet that never fully stopped dripping. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from a bank I had never used. The woman on the line said there was a past due balance on a credit card connected to my social security number. I laughed at first and told her she must have the wrong person. After work, I drove straight to my parents' house with my stomach in knots. I sat at the kitchen table while my dad reviewed the letter the bank had sent. His eyes moved quickly. Too quickly. He said it was probably a clerical mistake. Identity theft happened all the time now, he said. If we caught it early, it wouldn't be a big deal. That word comforted me then. He made a phone call, speaking in a tone that sounded both charming and firm. When he hung up, he told me he would handle it. There was nothing for me to worry about. I wanted to believe him, so I did. A few years later, when I was about 28, I received a letter from the Internal Revenue Service. They wanted to review a tax return I had filed 2 years earlier. There were inconsistencies, missing forms, investment accounts I had never heard of. I remember sitting at my small dining table holding that letter, feeling like I had been accused of cheating on a test I never took. My hands grew clammy, my vision blurred. Once again, I went to my dad. He read the letter and frowned, not in surprise, but annoyance. He asked calmly if I had made any investments without telling him. I said no. My finances were simple. Salary, rent, car payment, small savings. That was it. He sighed and said large institutions made mistakes all the time. He said he knew people who could fix it. He took the letter from my hand and said that was what dads were for. A week later, he told me it was resolved. The letter disappeared into his office, along with my fear and a lot of questions I never asked. If I had been older, or less desperate for his approval, maybe I would have pushed harder. Instead, I let his confidence silence every alarm in my head. As I reached the middle landing of the staircase, my dress whispering against my ankles, I thought about Sarah. When we were kids, she used to stand between me and Dad when he was angry. When we grew up, she started standing beside him instead. I never knew exactly when that shift happened. I only knew that at some point, Dad stopped forcing me into his plans and started using her. There was one night about a year before the wedding that stayed with me. I had stopped by my parents' house unexpectedly, letting myself in with the old emergency key. The house was quiet except for low voices coming from Dad's office. The door wasn't fully closed. Dad sat at his desk, files spread out in front of him. Sarah sat across from him, shoulders drawn in. He slid a stack of papers toward her and told her to sign them. I couldn't hear every word, but the ones I caught were sharp enough. Deadline. Time. Do you want me to fix this or not? Her hand trembled as she held the pen. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then she signed. Page after page. She never asked what she was signing. Later that night, she texted me something short. She said she wished things were different. When I called to ask what she meant, she brushed it off and said she was just tired. Looking back, I knew those documents and mine were connected. Same ink. Same lies. Same man pushing them across a desk. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The ceremony coordinator smiled too brightly and gestured toward the open doors. Beyond them, rows of white chairs waited. Candles flickered along the aisle. Ethan stood beneath the arch in his navy suit, the lake shimmering behind him in the afternoon light. He looked calm, steady, unaware that the ground beneath us was already fractured. My chest tightened in a different way then. This wasn't just about my parents anymore. Ethan had never asked for any of this. He came from a quiet family in Oregon. People who raised their kids with backyard barbecues and weekend projects, not silent expectations and financial control. The worst thing his father ever did was make him mow the lawn in the rain for missing curfew. I thought about the first time Ethan sensed something was wrong. It was about 2 months before the wedding. A thick envelope had arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice about a trust in my name. The language was careful, but the message was clear. I was listed as a beneficiary on property and accounts I had never touched. I sat on the couch holding the papers when Ethan walked in. He read my expression before the letter. When he finished reading, he asked gently if I knew anything about it. I shook my head. He said it didn't make sense and suggested we talk to a lawyer or a financial advisor. Someone outside my family. I wanted to agree. Instead, I heard my dad's voice in my head. Family business. Not for outsiders. I told Ethan it was probably an old plan my dad had forgotten to mention. Something he'd set up years ago. Ethan let it go, but not completely. A few days later, I brought it up at dinner with my parents. Dad didn't flinch. He said he'd started something years ago to protect me. It was complicated, he said. Above my head. He would handle it. Then he asked casually if I had anything at my apartment that belonged to him. Documents. Drives. Anything I might have picked up by mistake. I told him no. He smiled like we were discussing the weather. Mom changed the subject. Sarah stared at her plate. Now, standing at the entrance to my own wedding, all of those moments pressed down on me at once. The credit card. The audit. The trust. Sarah's shaking hand. Dad's pale face when she said it was gone. The coordinator touched my arm again. The doors were about to open. I drew in a breath that felt deeper than my lungs. If I kept pretending I didn't know what I knew, I would become exactly what Dad wanted me to be. Quiet. Useful. Blind. I straightened my back, tightened my grip on the bouquet, and waited for the doors to swing wide. The doors opened, and a warm rush of air mixed with soft music washed over me. For a single heartbeat, everything looked almost normal. Guests stood, turning toward me with bright smiles and expectant eyes. My bouquet felt heavier than it should have as I stepped forward onto the white runner. Each step was slow, measured. I kept my chin lifted and my breathing steady, but inside, everything pulsed with the pressure of truths stacked behind me. I took a few more steps when my vision blurred, just for a moment. Then again. Another memory forced its way forward. The night that finally convinced me something was deeply wrong. It began with a phone call. Mom invited me over for dinner on a Thursday evening, saying she had something she wanted to show me for the wedding. A new place-setting idea. A decoration she thought fit the color palette better than what I had chosen. Those calls always came wrapped in sweetness, with a faint edge of criticism underneath. I agreed to stop by after work. When I arrived, the kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. The house felt too quiet for dinner to be ready. Mom was in the living room carefully arranging napkins on the coffee table, like she was setting a scene. She said she was waiting for Dad, who was finishing a call with an associate. Her voice carried that clipped tone she used when she was irritated, but wanted everything to appear fine. I offered to bring in the salad bowl from the kitchen. She waved me off and said she would handle it. Her eyes kept darting toward the office at the end of the hall. From there, I could hear Dad's voice. Low. Sharper than usual. The kind of tone that made the air feel thinner. I pretended to check my phone, then walked casually toward the hallway as if I were heading to the bathroom. The office door wasn't fully closed. A thin strip of light spilled into the hall. Dad leaned over his desk, gripping a file folder with both hands. He spoke in that clipped way he used when things were slipping out of his control. He said the situation needed to be cleaned up quickly. There was a deadline. If certain papers were exposed, the entire structure would collapse. He paused, then said he had already handled some documents, but there were still pieces beyond his reach. My stomach tightened. It wasn't hard to guess what he meant. Then he said my name. He told the person on the phone that everything needed to be pulled back before Jenna did something foolish. He said my name like it was a problem he needed to solve. My heart slammed so loudly I thought he might hear it. I stepped back, but the floorboard beneath my heel creaked. The sound was small, but Dad stopped speaking. The silence that followed felt sharp and dangerous. I moved quickly into the bathroom and held my breath. After a moment, his voice resumed. Softer. Lower. Controlled. Like he was reminding himself who he needed to be around me. When I returned to the living room, Mom told me to sit. She smoothed the napkin on her lap and asked if I felt all right. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for signs of disobedience. Dad entered with a practiced smile and kissed the top of my head. He asked how my day had been. I answered normally, forcing my voice steady. I knew if I showed even a crack, he would notice. Dinner passed in uneasy quiet. Mom talked about the guest list, the florist, my dress fittings. Her tone was cheerful, but her eyes kept flicking toward Dad, waiting for cues. Halfway through the meal, Dad asked casually if I had gone through some old boxes I had taken from the house a few weeks earlier. I hadn't taken any boxes. His gaze was too sharp, too expectant. I said no and told him I hadn't had much time because of wedding planning. He nodded slowly, then said that if I came across anything that belonged to him, I should bring it back right away. He said he had misplaced something important and wanted to be sure I hadn't picked it up by mistake. My heart jumped. Dad never misplaced anything. Not papers. Not receipts. Not control. If he was searching, it meant he already knew exactly what was missing. After dinner, I offered to help clear the table. Mom said no too quickly, like she didn't want me near anything. She told me brides needed their rest. She touched my arm lightly, but her fingers trembled. As I picked up my coat, Sarah came through the front door. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup slightly smudged, like she'd been crying or rubbing her eyes. She greeted me quietly and walked past into the kitchen. When I stepped onto the porch, I heard Mom's voice behind me, just loud enough to catch. She said she wished I trusted them more. Dad replied that trust had to be earned and that some people didn't understand what loyalty looked like. I walked to my car with my hands shaking. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The air inside the car felt thick and sour. And I knew then that whatever was happening in that house wasn't a misunderstanding or a harmless mistake. Something real was moving under my feet. Back in the present, the aisles stretched ahead of me, white and endless. I tightened my grip on the bouquet and kept walking, knowing I was no longer stepping toward a beginning. I was stepping toward a reckoning. The morning after that dinner, I found Sarah waiting outside my apartment building. She stood near the steps with her arms wrapped around herself, even though the weather was warm. Her face looked tired, drawn in a way I had never seen before. She said she needed to talk, but her voice shook so badly I had to ask her to repeat herself. She told me she was exhausted, that she felt trapped. She said Dad had asked her to sign documents she didn't fully understand, and that saying no never felt like a real option. I asked her what she had signed. She shook her head and said she didn't want to talk about it. Then she said something that has echoed in my mind ever since. She told me I didn't know the full story. That Dad had ways of handling problems that could quietly ruin someone. She said she wished she could leave, but she didn't know how. She left quickly after that. I stood there watching her drive away, tears shining in her eyes. Something inside me cracked that day. A thin layer of denial I had been clinging to finally gave way. Now, standing at the entrance of my own wedding, I felt the weight of every memory pressing down at once. The truth was no longer hiding in corners. It was here, breathing against my skin. The doors closed behind me, sealing off the past. The aisle stretched ahead like a long white path I had been walking toward my entire life. I tightened my grip on the bouquet and drew a slow breath, bracing myself for whatever waited on the other side. The music swelled, and I started down the aisle as everyone turned to look at me. The world narrowed into a tunnel of flickering candles and familiar faces. I heard the soft rustle of guests sitting back down. A child whispered. An aunt sniffled, already crying. At the far end, Ethan stood beneath the arch wrapped in white flowers, trying to catch my eye with a smile that promised a future together. But my mind wouldn't stay in the present. It kept pulling me back to Sarah. To all the times she stood near me like we were on the same side, even when I knew she was closer to Dad. There was one evening a few weeks before the wedding that refused to leave my thoughts. The night I stopped believing Sarah was just following orders without understanding them. I was in my Seattle apartment, sitting on the couch with my laptop open and the wedding planner spread across the coffee table. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah asking if she could come by. That alone felt strange. She was never spontaneous, never unplanned. I said yes and put on a pot of coffee, more from nerves than hospitality. When she arrived, she looked worn down. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Her blouse wrinkled, not matching her usual careful appearance. She set her purse down and hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure she should come in. I asked if everything was okay. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said she just wanted to see how wedding planning was going. Her voice sounded too bright. She wandered the room, touching small things, avoiding something heavier. Eventually, she sat on the edge of the couch and asked how I felt about marrying into Ethan's family. She asked if I was excited to have in-laws who seemed calm and normal. The way she said normal made my chest ache. I told her I was grateful. That being with Ethan's family felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. She nodded slowly, staring at her hands. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. She wondered how different our lives might have been if Dad had worked a regular job. Not deals and spreadsheets and meetings with men in expensive suits. The question was so strange I didn't know how to answer. She laughed once, a hard sound, and said Dad liked to pretend he carried the family on his shoulders. But really, he was just good at getting other people to sign their names for him. My heart jumped. It was the first time she had ever criticized him out loud. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said she didn't want to get into it. She said she was tired of being the only one who knew what existed beneath his polished image. Then she looked straight at me and asked if I had ever wondered why my name kept appearing where it didn't belong. The credit card. The tax issues. The trust letter. I froze. I had never told her about the USB. I asked why she was asking me that. She rubbed her temples and said when Dad felt cornered, he used the people closest to him as shields. That he had done it to her more than once. That he had used her signature on documents she didn't understand, all in the name of protecting the family. She said he made you feel like saying no meant betraying everyone you loved. So you signed. And hoped it wouldn't explode. I asked if she thought it would. She nodded once. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She said something was coming. Like a storm that had been on the horizon for years, finally moving in. I wanted to pull her into the space I had started to build away from Dad's control. But then she said something that made me step back. She told me Dad was worried about missing pieces. She used those words carefully. Missing pieces. She said he believed some things had been misplaced. Possibly at my apartment. And that if I found anything that belonged to him, I should give it to him directly. No outsiders. My chest tightened. I asked her if she thought he was using my name the same way he had used hers. For the first time in our lives, she didn't look away. She said yes. Then she added that as long as everything stayed within the family, he could fix it. But if something slipped outside, if the wrong person got the wrong file or the wrong drive. I asked her directly if she was warning me or working for him. Her face crumpled for a moment before she smoothed it out. She said she didn't know anymore. That she had spent so long standing beside him, she couldn't tell which thoughts were hers and which belonged to him. I told her I didn't have anything of his. That was the last lie I told her. As she left, she paused in the doorway and said she hoped I knew what I was doing. She said Dad wouldn't let go of anything he believed belonged to him without a fight. That sentence followed me all the way to my wedding day. Back in the present, I continued down the aisle, each step slow and deliberate, my dress whispering softly with every movement. My eyes drifted over the faces on either side of me. Aunts and cousins. Old family friends. People from Ethan's work. Smiles everywhere. Pride. Celebration. And there, near the front on my side, sat Sarah. She had already returned from whatever search Dad had sent her on. Her posture was rigid, back straight, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. When our eyes met, something flickered across her face. Guilt. Fear. Maybe both. Behind her sat Dad. His jaw was clenched, hands folded together too tightly, his expression locked in place. Mom sat beside him wearing that familiar frozen smile, the one she used at charity events when she wanted to appear delighted while feeling anything but. They looked perfect, like a painting of a flawless family. Except I knew every crack in the frame. I forced myself to keep walking, even as my pulse hammered in my ears. By the time I reached the front row, I could feel Dad's gaze burning into me. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose the fragile control I was holding on to. Instead, I focused on Ethan waiting beneath the arch. On the knowledge that while my family believed they were still ahead of me, the truth had already begun shifting quietly into my hands. When I reached Ethan, the music softened and faded. The officiant greeted us with a warm smile and began speaking about love, partnership, and shared futures. I tried to steady my breathing, but the air around me felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan squeezed my hand and whispered that I looked beautiful. I nodded, letting his voice ground me for a second. But the weight I carried pressed hard against my ribs. The officiant continued, words flowing easily, but my attention drifted sideways. My thoughts tangled around everything that had led me here. Every lie, every warning, every silence. This wasn't just about uncovering what my parents had done. It was about choosing who I would be next. I realized then that this moment, standing here under open sky, with everyone watching, was exactly why I had held on to the USB. Why I had waited. Why I hadn't exposed anything sooner. I wasn't running anymore. I was standing in the only place they couldn't pull me back from. The officiant paused, smiling, and asked if we were ready to begin our vows. I felt my heartbeat slow. This was it. Not the ending they expected, but the beginning I had chosen. I could sense Dad's stare cutting straight through me, like he was trying to decode my thoughts from rows away. Mom sat rigid beside him, posture perfect, hands folded as if she were carved from stone. Sarah was wedged between them, her body unnaturally still, eyes fixed on a spot that didn't exist. I wondered if her mind was circling the missing drive. If she was reliving the moment she slipped away from the reception earlier, following Dad's quiet instructions, only to come back pale and shaking. I could still picture her mouth shaping the words. It was gone. I wondered if she feared I knew far more than I ever showed. Ethan's grip tightened around my hand, pulling me back into the present. The officiant asked him to speak first. Ethan drew a small folded card from his pocket and held it loosely, never breaking eye contact with me. His voice was calm and sincere, filled with promises of partnership, patience, and a life rooted in honesty. Each word highlighted the divide between the future I wanted and the past I was trying to escape. When it was my turn, I slid my fingers into the hidden lace pocket sewn inside my gown. My vows rested on thin ivory paper. My hands trembled, and for a second I thought I might drop them. I inhaled deeply and met Ethan's eyes. His expression softened, warmth spreading through my chest, steadying me enough to begin. The first lines came easily, grounding me. Then I felt it. That sharp awareness at the back of my neck. The unmistakable sense of being watched too closely. I kept reading, but from the corner of my vision, I saw Sarah lean forward, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on me. Her expression was unreadable. Fear. Guilt. Maybe a warning. I finished and folded the paper carefully. The officiant smiled and moved on, but the air thickened, heavy and uneasy. Then a quiet sound cut through the stillness. My phone vibrated inside the hidden pocket of my gown. My heart lurched. Guests shifted, unaware. Ethan didn't notice. The officiant kept speaking. Then my phone vibrated again. And again. A long, insistent buzz. Cold spread through me. Only one person ever called 3 times like that. Detective Ray Daniels. The only person outside myself who knew part of the truth. I kept my face composed as the rings were handed forward. The ceremony moved on, but every vibration echoed through my spine. When I placed the ring on Ethan's finger, my movements were automatic. I nodded at the right moments, but one thought consumed me. Something was wrong. Very wrong. After the third vibration, the phone went silent, but the damage had already settled deep in my chest. The rest of the ceremony unfolded like a distant dream. Applause. Ethan lifting my veil. Cameras flashing. A kiss that felt real, yet unreal. Everything looked perfect, arranged around me as if it belonged to someone else. As we walked back up the aisle through falling petals, I scanned the rows again. Dad hadn't moved. His face was tight, unreadable. Mom clapped politely, her eyes distant. Sarah kept her gaze lowered, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear. Then I saw him. Near a column wrapped in greenery stood a man who didn't belong. Dark suit. Hands folded. Still and patient. Officer Daniels. He gave a slight nod. No smile. The air left my lungs. I didn't react. No one else noticed. And then, when I blinked, he was gone. A warning etched itself into my bones. At the reception, music floated through the room as guests mingled around candlelit tables. Ethan stepped away to greet friends. I slipped toward the hallway near the restrooms, the only place I could reach my phone unnoticed. The screen lit up. Missed calls. Then a text. Call me right now. It is urgent. My throat tightened. I typed a quick response, asking if everything was okay, but before I could send it, a shadow moved beside me. Sarah stepped forward. She looked sickly pale, hands clenched, breath shallow. She told me Dad needed to speak with me, that his voice had changed, that he finally realized the drive wouldn't be found. Then she whispered the part that made the hallway feel smaller. He knew someone had gone to the police. I asked how he knew. Sarah's eyes filled with something broken. She said Dad watched for shifts, for signs. And when he saw how I carried myself during the ceremony, he understood. My phone glowed dimly in my hand. Call me right now. Before I could move, the door at the end of the hallway opened. Dad stepped inside and closed it softly behind him. His face was calm. That terrified me. He walked toward me slowly, deliberate, like he wanted me to understand there was no escape. I backed into the wall without realizing it, lay scratching my skin. My breath turned shallow, but I forced myself not to show it. He stopped a few feet away. His expression was smooth, practiced. The same one he wore when tightening control under the guise of reason. He said we needed to talk. I asked what he wanted. My voice surprised me by sounding steady. He stepped closer. Said he knew someone had spoken to the police. He didn't accuse me outright. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. Silence stretched between us. He spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of everything he claimed to have built for this family. He expected something in return. Something inside me hardened. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. When he leaned in and warned me about consequences, about outsiders, about protection, I straightened instead of shrinking. I asked him calmly what he thought had been given to the police. That's when I saw it. Fear. Just a crack. But it was there. From that moment on, control slipped through his fingers. Papers were offered. A deal disguised as protection. A signature meant to make me the shield for his choices. I refused. For the first time in my life, my hands didn't shake. Footsteps approached. A knock followed. Authority arrived. When the officers stepped in, the truth finally surfaced. Financial misconduct. Identity misuse. Coercion. My dad was detained. Not defeated by me, but by the truth. He looked at me one last time as they led him away. Not with anger. With disbelief. Like he was seeing me for the first time. The wedding continued quietly. Not perfectly, but honestly. Ethan stood beside me through everything. Steady. Present. Real. Later, under the stars, I felt no victory. Only acceptance. What happened had always been coming. As we left the venue, I looked back once. Not with regret. With clarity. The truth had finally stepped into the light.